In the year 1325, inside the walled towns of medieval Europe, where church bells marked every hour and the smell of burning tallow candles filled the air, human desire moved beneath the surface of society in ways that few dared to describe openly. This was a world governed by rigid religious authority, strict social norms, and an overwhelming fear of moral corruption. Yet, beneath this moral landscape existed a surprising collection of intimate customs, rituals, superstitions, and punishments that reveal how medieval men and women struggled to balance faith, fear, and desire. These practices, though shocking to modern eyes, were shaped by a combination of religious law, lack of scientific knowledge, widespread illiteracy, and the constant influence of local customs that had survived since pagan antiquity. To understand why such unusual customs flourished, one must first understand the environment of medieval Europe between the 9th and 15th centuries. This was an age where the Church dictated nearly every aspect of daily life, from how people prayed to how they married, and even when they were permitted to be intimate. According to various ecclesiastical calendars, there were over 100 days a year during which marital relations were forbidden, including Lent, Advent, feast days, Sundays, and days preceding communion. The average medieval couple was therefore required to navigate a complex system of religious rules, leading many to develop creative, often bizarre practices to avoid the sin of lust while still attempting to maintain a family. At the same time, medieval medical theories added an entirely different layer of confusion. Influenced by ancient Greek and Roman texts, physicians believed in the balance of humors and saw desire as a medical condition rather than a purely emotional one. They frequently recommended unusual remedies. Some physicians claimed that eating certain foods like almonds or saffron increased the chances of conception, while others insisted that physical intimacy should be timed according to lunar cycles. These beliefs created an atmosphere where superstition blended with medicine, and where people often sought guidance from herbalists, clergy, and midwives who relied on a mixture of folk wisdom and church teachings. While the church attempted to control desire through strict moral codes, local communities sometimes developed practices that stood in direct contrast to these laws. One of the most surprising examples comes from medieval Northern Europe, where local custom allowed newlyweds to receive assistance from the community in consummating their marriage. This often meant that neighbors, friends, and even relatives might wait outside the bridal chamber, applauding or shouting encouragement to ensure the marriage was complete. Though such behavior seems invasive today, it was seen as a way of ensuring legitimacy, since inheritance was a primary concern in a world where land and family alliances were vital. Another practice that flourished in certain regions was known as bed warming. In rural areas where marriages were arranged and young men and women often had little opportunity to meet beforehand, local custom sometimes allowed the couple to lie together fully clothed under supervision before their wedding day. This ritual, which varied from region to region, was intended to allow the couple to grow comfortable with one another, though the community kept strict boundaries. Records from medieval France and the British Isles describe village elders who monitored such encounters, ensuring that the future spouses followed rules designed to protect morality while still offering a form of courtship. While some customs were meant to support marriage, others reflected the darker side of medieval society. Religious authorities frequently punished people for breaking moral codes, and the punishments could be public and humiliating. In some towns, men and women accused of illicit behavior were paraded through the streets wearing symbolic clothing that represented their supposed sins. In certain parts of Germany, the accused were forced to wear heavy iron masks with exaggerated features, serving as a physical reminder of perceived moral corruption. The purpose of these punishments was not only to shame the individual, but also to reinforce the community's values and the church's control. Yet despite these harsh restrictions, medieval people often sought ways to express their desires discreetly. Manuscripts and illuminated texts from the period reveal a surprising amount of symbolic imagery hidden within the margins of holy texts. These images, created by monks and scribes, often portrayed humorous or satirical depictions of human behavior. Scholars today are puzzled by these illustrations, which suggest that even those living under the strict discipline of religious life possessed a hidden sense of humor and curiosity about the world. One of the most misunderstood practices of the medieval era involved courtly love, a cultural phenomenon that emerged in the 12th century. Courtly love described a system in which knights expressed admiration for noble women through poetry, song, and secret tokens. The relationship was often platonic, at least in theory, but it celebrated emotional and sometimes physical attraction outside of marriage. The Church disapproved of courtly love, seeing it as a threat to marital stability and social order. Yet it flourished, especially in France and southern Europe, where troubadours composed elaborate poems describing the emotional torment of forbidden desire. Courtly love influenced medieval literature, shaped the chivalric code, and set the foundation for romantic storytelling in later centuries. The medieval fascination with fertility also shaped several unusual customs. In a time when infant mortality was extremely high and producing heirs was a necessity, couples often turned to rituals believed to increase fertility. Some traditions involved visiting holy shrines dedicated to saints associated with childbirth. Others relied on charms or objects believed to possess healing powers. In England, couples sometimes visited specific stones or springs thought to enhance fertility, performing rituals based on ancient pagan beliefs. These practices reveal the ways medieval people blended faith and superstition, often seeking any possible advantage in a world filled with uncertainty. One of the most bizarre practices involved legal cases concerning impotence. Medieval courts took marriage contracts extremely seriously, and a husband's inability to produce heirs could lead to public examinations and humiliating tests. In France, court records describe cases where a man accused of impotence was required to demonstrate his condition before a panel of witnesses, including medical experts and clergy. The process was deeply invasive and often influenced by politics, family alliances, and social pressures. These trials show how deeply medieval society valued reproduction and how the law attempted to regulate the most private aspects of life. As we move deeper into the medieval period, the contradictions of the era become more apparent. On the one hand, the Church preached restraint and viewed desire as a potential source of moral downfall. On the other hand, the daily realities of marriage, inheritance, and community life forced people to create their own systems for managing intimacy. The result was a complex mixture of religious doctrine, local custom, superstition, and social expectation. Medieval Europe was not a monolithic culture, but a diverse and constantly evolving mixture of beliefs and traditions, all shaped by the challenges of surviving in a world defined by disease, war, and limited scientific understanding. This period also reminds us that human behavior, no matter how heavily regulated, often finds a way to express itself. Whether through clandestine rituals, local customs, or symbolic art, medieval people navigated strict moral codes with ingenuity and sometimes surprising creativity. Their practices, though strange to us, were attempts to maintain order, promote fertility, secure inheritance, and manage social relationships. To understand them is to understand the values and fears of a society far removed from our own, yet deeply connected to the universal human struggle between desire and discipline. In the winter of 1184, inside the draughty halls of a manor in northern France, a local lord summoned his household clergy to witness a peculiar dispute. A young couple, married barely 6 months, stood before him seeking judgment over a matter that today would seem impossibly private. Yet in medieval society, the most intimate aspects of life were often legal, public, and heavily regulated. This moment, documented in manorial court rolls, reveals how deeply the medieval world intertwined law, faith, superstition, and community oversight. What unfolded in that hall was not unusual. Medieval Europe developed an extraordinary system of customs, rituals, punishments, and beliefs that governed intimacy with an intensity rarely seen in any other era. As the Church expanded its influence after the 10th century, marriage changed from a simple family agreement into a sacrament overseen by clergy. This shift introduced new legal frameworks that attempted to regulate nearly every aspect of couples' relationships. Canon law dictated who could marry, under what circumstances, and even how couples should behave. By the 13th century, many dioceses issued detailed penitential handbooks advising confessors on how to question married couples about their private lives. Confession became a tool not only of spiritual discipline, but also of social control. People were often interrogated about their conduct in ways that would be considered intrusive today. One of the most surprising aspects of medieval law involved annulment cases. When a marriage failed to produce children or one partner accused the other of misconduct, families sometimes took their disputes to ecclesiastical courts. These courts had the authority to annul marriages if they believed the union was invalid from the beginning. The evidence used in these cases paints a vivid picture of medieval society. Some records describe spouses claiming they were tricked into marriage by shape-shifting demons, influenced by sorcery, or physically incapable due to supernatural forces. In other instances, individuals argued that their unions were cursed or that celestial omens predicted misfortune, reflecting how deeply superstition was woven into daily life. Fertility was central to these disputes, for inheritance determined everything. Land ownership, wealth, and political alliances all depended on producing heirs. As a result, communities developed rituals aimed at improving fertility that today seem strange but were once taken extremely seriously. In rural England, couples visited ancient stones believed to cure sterility. In parts of France and the Low Countries, women seeking children visited shrines dedicated to saints associated with childbirth. They brought tokens such as ribbons, wax figurines, or offerings of bread, hoping divine intervention would help them conceive. These practices were deeply rooted in pre-Christian traditions, but were gradually absorbed into Christian worship. Superstition extended even further. Medieval medical texts, based largely on ancient theories, promoted unusual remedies. Physicians believed the body was governed by four humors, and that desire was influenced by the movement of these humors. Herbalists recommended cures based on planetary alignments or seasonal changes. Midwives, who played an essential role in medieval communities, often combined folk wisdom with religious ritual. They relied heavily on charms, prayers, and natural remedies when advising women. Their authority in matters of fertility and childbirth was so strong that church councils in the 13th and 14th centuries attempted to regulate midwifery, fearing that some practices bordered on sorcery. In addition to rituals focused on fertility, medieval towns often enforced strict laws designed to uphold public morality. These laws are among the most unusual aspects of medieval social control. In several German cities, couples caught violating local ordinances faced public shaming. Punishments included being forced to sit backwards on a donkey while paraded through town or being locked into a heavy wooden device that resembled a stock's frame but was designed specifically for those accused of violating moral norms. These public displays served as cautionary lessons to the community, blending humiliation with spectacle. The Church played a significant role in shaping attitudes toward purity. monastic leaders wrote elaborate texts detailing the spiritual dangers of temptation. They encouraged practices that were sometimes extreme by modern standards. In certain monastic communities, men and women lived under strict rules that controlled their behavior and imposed harsh penances for perceived moral lapses. Some monasteries even used symbolic punishments, such as forcing offenders to wear heavy lead badges representing their supposed sins. These actions reveal the medieval belief that regulating desire was essential to protecting the soul. But not all practices were rooted in punishment. Some customs were celebratory, reflecting a more complex picture of medieval society. In parts of rural Europe, communal festivals included symbolic rituals connected to courtship and marriage. During spring festivals, unmarried men and women participated in dances, games, and songs designed to encourage social bonding. While the Church sometimes condemned these events, communities continued them because they played an essential role in young people choosing partners. These festivals often blended Christian themes with older pagan traditions, creating a hybrid culture that defined medieval life. One of the most unusual cultural expressions of the medieval era appeared in literature. Courtly love, which emerged in the 12th century, celebrated emotional longing and idealized affection outside of marriage. Troubadours in southern France composed elaborate poems describing the tension between desire and virtue. These stories influenced noble courts across Europe and created an aristocratic culture that admired subtle emotional expression. Knights carried tokens from noblewomen, poets wrote verses describing unattainable affection, and entire courts participated in staged debates about love. Although these traditions were idealized and often purely symbolic, they created a cultural environment that challenged church teachings about desire. The spread of illuminated manuscripts during the later medieval period added another fascinating element. Monastic scribes illustrated religious texts with intricate designs, but hidden among the vines, animals, and saints were unexpected images. Marginalia often featured humorous or satirical drawings that contrasted sharply with the sacred content. Some illustrated human behaviors or symbolic scenes that commented on society's moral contradictions. Scholars believe these images offered a form of private expression for scribes who lived under strict discipline. They provide insight into the hidden thoughts and cultural tensions of the time. Legal cases concerning marital disputes offer another window into medieval beliefs. Courts were often the final authority in resolving questions about legitimacy. If a marriage was challenged, judges sometimes required witnesses to testify about the couple's behavior, even describing what they believed happened in the household. In extreme cases, individuals accused of violating social norms faced examinations by panels of clergy and physicians who based their judgments on medieval medical theories. These proceedings reveal a world in which private life was subject to intense public scrutiny. As population centers grew in the later medieval period, cities introduced elaborate systems of regulation. In Venice, Florence, and Paris, councils passed laws restricting behavior between couples in public places. Violators faced fines or public penalties. Surveillance became a tool of urban governance. Street patrols watched for breaches of social order, and local officials maintained records of accusations. These laws were attempts to maintain civic reputation in cities that valued their political and cultural influence. The rise of scholasticism in the universities added yet another layer. Scholars debated philosophical questions about human nature, morality, and the purpose of marriage. Their writings influenced legal codes and shaped the expectations placed on couples. Many discussions focused on balancing reason with religious doctrine, illustrating the medieval attempt to reconcile human behavior with moral ideals. Through all these customs, rituals, laws, and beliefs, we see a world struggling to understand the most complicated aspect of human behavior. Medieval society did not view intimacy as a private matter. It was connected to religion, law, family alliances, superstition, and community values. The result was a landscape of practices that could be supportive, restrictive, humorous, or deeply invasive. What makes these customs important today is not their strangeness, but what they reveal about medieval life. They show a society shaped by fear of disease, dependence on agriculture, rigid hierarchy, and a profound belief in divine order. They also show that despite strict rules, people constantly searched for ways to express emotion, form relationships, and protect their families. Their practices were not merely eccentric, but reflections of a world where survival, faith, and tradition were inseparable. In the year 1256, inside the stone infirmary of a Cistercian abbey in Burgundy, a traveling merchant lay on a wooden cot while a monk, physician, examined him by torchlight. Collections of handwritten manuscripts lined the shelves, filled with theories from Hippocrates, Galen, Avicenna, and Aristotle. The monk whispered a prayer, dipped a quill in ink, and began writing a medical prescription based not on modern science, but on a world where the body was controlled by humors, the stars influenced behavior, and health was inseparable from morality. This moment captures the medieval mindset perfectly, a world where desire, health, superstition, and religion were interwoven tightly enough to create practices that appear extraordinary to the modern reader. To understand the era's strangest customs, we must examine medieval medical beliefs. Physicians believed that the body was governed by four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Every aspect of life, from emotional temperament to physical urges, was thought to depend on these substances. Illness occurred when the humors were out of balance, and restoring harmony required a combination of diet, herbal remedies, and sometimes extreme procedures. Because desire was seen as a physical sensation caused by humoral imbalance, medieval medical texts described it as a medical condition rather than an emotional experience. This belief deeply influenced how society understood courtship, marriage, and family life. Medical writers frequently associated certain foods, seasons, and even colors with mood and behavior. Warm foods like nuts, honey, and spices were believed to stimulate vitality, while cold foods such as lettuce and cucumbers were thought to calm the body. Physicians advised couples to time personal interactions according to digestion, sleep cycles, and lunar phases. Such recommendations were not casual suggestions, but treated as legitimate scientific advice drawn from classical authorities. People followed these guidelines closely, believing they ensured good health, successful marriages, and strong children. Astrology added another layer of complexity. Medieval doctors often consulted the positions of the planets before offering medical advice. They believed celestial bodies exerted direct influence over the human body, especially the brain and heart. University, trained physicians from Paris, Bologna, and Oxford kept detailed astrological charts and refused to treat patients until the stars were in favorable alignment. This practice extended to advice on marriage and conception. Documents from the 13th and 14th centuries show physicians warning couples to avoid certain days because they were astrologically unlucky. Such warnings reveal how deeply medieval people relied on cosmic explanations for the most personal aspects of their lives. Midwives, herbalists, and village healers held enormous authority within their communities. While physicians served the elite, these women assisted ordinary families and relied on knowledge passed down for generations. They understood the properties of herbs such as mugwort, fennel, and rosemary, and used them to treat daily ailments. Their practices blended natural remedies with rituals that had survived since pagan times. For example, some midwives recommended carrying certain stones or amulets believed to protect the household or promote fertility. These items were not considered magical in the modern sense, but were seen as tools for maintaining physical and spiritual balance. Because medical knowledge was limited, communities often turned to symbolic rituals to address personal concerns. One of the most unusual involved the belief that emotional harmony between spouses was essential for physical well-being. Medieval moralists wrote extensively about the need for couples to maintain unity, warning that conflict could lead to illness or misfortune. This belief influenced marriage counseling practices within the church. Parish priests frequently advised couples on how to maintain peace in the household, using guidelines from penitential manuals that classified emotional disputes alongside spiritual sins. These texts reveal a society that viewed family life as a moral and medical enterprise at the same time. Medieval superstition also shaped how people interpreted dreams. Many believed dreams carried messages from saints, angels, or sometimes hostile forces. Scholars compiled dream manuals that attempted to interpret visions and symbols. Some dreams were seen as warnings about relationships or family matters. A dream involving certain animals, for example, might be interpreted as a sign of future conflict or a need for repentance. These interpretations were taken seriously by both clergy and laypeople, illustrating the blurred line between psychology, spirituality, and social customs. Legal records from the 12th to 15th centuries offer additional insight into the strange intersections of medicine and superstition. In England, France, and parts of Italy, courts sometimes heard cases involving claims of supernatural interference in family life. Individuals accused each other of using charms or potions to influence emotions or create discord between spouses. Although many such accusations were rooted in fear and misunderstanding, they were taken seriously in a society that saw the spiritual world as constantly interacting with daily life. Judges called upon both clergy and physicians to provide testimony, combining religious doctrine with medical theory. One of the most surprising aspects of medieval culture is how communities responded to suspected disturbances within marriages. Because disease and death were common, people often sought explanations in the supernatural. If a couple struggled to have children, neighbors might speculate that the household had been cursed. Some communities held night vigils, where elders gathered to pray for a family believed to be struggling with misfortune. These vigils sometimes included rituals such as sprinkling holy water throughout the house or placing protective objects above doors and windows. Such actions reflect the medieval conviction that the world was filled with unseen forces capable of influencing human life. While many practices seem strange, they must be understood in the context of a society with limited medical knowledge. Without modern science, people relied on what they had: tradition, theology, and shared wisdom. Even the educated elite, who studied Aristotle and Avicenna, accepted theories that now appear outdated. These beliefs influenced not only personal lives but also politics. Royal marriages, for example, often consulted astrologers before planning wedding ceremonies. Monarchs believed that cosmic alignment played a role in producing heirs who would preserve dynastic stability. Their decisions demonstrate how medieval rulers combined scientific reasoning with superstition to guide state policy. The influence of religious doctrine cannot be overstated. Church leaders wrote extensively about the moral responsibilities of marriage, associating emotional conduct with spiritual health. They believed household order was essential to societal order. As a result, clergy offered guidance based on a mixture of biblical teaching, classical learning, and practical experience. Some monasteries produced manuals advising priests on how to counsel families. These manuals encouraged moderation, harmony, and discipline, portraying personal relationships as part of the divine plan. Medieval literature provides an additional window into the cultural imagination of the time. Chaucer, Boccaccio, and various anonymous writers produced stories that commented on marriage, desire, and social expectations. Their tales often mixed humor with moral lessons, highlighting the contradictions of medieval life. Through satire and symbolism, They explored themes of jealousy, loyalty, temptation, and personal struggle. Although these stories were shaped by the values of their era, they reveal universal concerns that still resonate today. As we examine these practices, we see that medieval people were not simply following irrational traditions. They were trying to make sense of a world filled with uncertainty. Their customs were attempts to maintain stability, protect households, and preserve community harmony. These efforts reflect a society shaped by war, famine, disease, and religious devotion. Without modern science, people relied on collective belief, ritual, and symbolic action to navigate daily challenges. The strangeness of medieval customs becomes understandable when viewed through this lens. Every ritual, law, remedy, and superstition was tied to preserving life, ensuring inheritance, or protecting spiritual well-being. These practices reveal a world both deeply foreign and deeply familiar. Despite the unusual methods, medieval people confronted the same concerns as people today: family, health, relationships, and survival. In the early spring of 1437, a royal scribe in London sat hunched over a long wooden desk, copying legal testimonies into a bound parchment volume. The case concerned a dispute between two noble families over inheritance rights, but buried within the testimony was a revealing detail. A midwife had been summoned years earlier to perform a ritual intended to improve harmony between the couple. This small entry, quietly recorded on a page now browned by age, captures a vital truth about the medieval world. Intimacy was not a private matter hidden behind household doors. It shaped politics, inheritance, religion, medicine, morality, and even national stability. The strange customs that governed it have left behind a cultural legacy still felt today. To understand the larger consequences of these practices, we must begin with the institution that held the most power over them, the Church. From the 11th century onward, church councils, popes, and theologians established doctrines that regulated marriage more strictly than in any previous European era. Marriage became a sacrament, and its purpose was redefined not only as companionship, but also as a sacred duty tied to the stability of Christian society. This shift transformed personal relationships into moral, spiritual, and legal contracts. It created a framework in which priests, bishops, and canon lawyers had authority over matters once considered private. These changes had profound consequences. Because marriage now required public vows and clerical oversight, disputes increasingly moved into ecclesiastical courts. These courts generated vast archives of testimonies about household life. Many of the most unusual medieval customs survive today only because they were recorded in these proceedings. The records reveal contradictions between official doctrine and lived experience. In theory, the Church promoted strict discipline. In practice, medieval communities blended religious teaching with local tradition, producing a complex and sometimes eccentric set of norms. The consequences of these norms extended far beyond the family. Consider inheritance. In a society where wealth was primarily agrarian, passing land to the next generation was crucial. Because producing heirs depended on stable marriages, communities took extraordinary measures to avoid situations that threatened lineage. Public rituals, night vigils, symbolic blessings, and community interventions existed partly to protect social order. When these efforts failed, legal battles erupted, sometimes lasting years. Inheritance disputes strained alliances, influenced political decisions, and even sparked local conflicts. Royal courts faced similar tensions. Kings and queens were expected to produce heirs who would secure the dynasty. When royal couples struggled with fertility, the pressure was intense. Chroniclers record stories of monarchs consulting physicians, astrologers, herbalists, and clergy. European politics in several kingdoms turned on these private challenges. The succession crises of England, France, and Castile were shaped as much by household matters as by military strategy. The bizarre remedies and rituals that surrounded royal marriages were not simply personal experiments, but responses to national emergencies. A monarch's inability to secure heirs could plunge a realm into war. Another major consequence of medieval customs was the growth of superstition. In a world without modern medicine, unexplained illness or misfortune was often attributed to unseen forces. Communities responded with rituals designed to restore order. Holy water was sprinkled in houses believed to be under spiritual threat. Protective objects were hung above beds. Shrines associated with childbirth and family stability attracted pilgrims seeking divine assistance. Even educated clergy participated in these traditions, blending Christian theology with long-standing local beliefs. These practices reveal that superstition was not a fringe phenomenon, but a central part of medieval culture. Public shaming rituals also left a lasting imprint on social life. Medieval cities often addressed household disputes through punishments intended to correct behavior and deter others. Parade punishments, symbolic masks, public confessions, and community gatherings reinforced the idea that maintaining moral order was the responsibility of everyone. Although such rituals may seem invasive, they were rooted in the belief that individual behavior had communal consequences. In an era of high mortality and limited resources, social cohesion was essential for survival. Among the most significant consequences of medieval customs was their impact on gender roles. Women carried the burdens of fertility, childbirth, and household management, and therefore faced greater scrutiny from religious and medical authorities. Midwives, though respected, were carefully watched. Church councils criticized them when their practices resembled older pagan rituals. Women involved in herbal medicine sometimes faced accusations of unlawful magic. These tensions shaped gender relations for centuries, influencing how society treated women's knowledge and authority. Men were also affected by social expectations. They were expected to maintain household leadership, fulfill marital obligations, and uphold community honor. Failure to meet these expectations could lead to public embarrassment, legal consequences, or family conflict. The pressure placed on men to uphold lineage and authority reveals the deep connection between personal identity and social duty in medieval Europe. Despite these challenges, many medieval customs evolved into more positive cultural expressions. Courtly love, for example, transformed European literature. The poetic traditions of Provence, northern France, and Italy created a new language for expressing emotion. These works inspired later writers such as Dante, Petrarch, and Chaucer. Ideals of chivalry, loyalty, and emotional refinement became part of European cultural identity, influencing everything from Renaissance art to modern Romantic literature. Folklore offers another legacy. Rituals once associated with fertility or household protection evolved into harmless traditions celebrated during festivals. Some rural communities still maintain springtime customs with roots in medieval symbolism. These practices survive not because people believe in their original purpose, but because they represent cultural continuity. They preserve memories of a world where communities relied on shared rituals to create meaning. One of the most fascinating consequences of medieval beliefs is how they shaped modern legal systems. The Church's insistence that marriage involved consent, public vows, and mutual responsibility laid the foundation for modern marriage laws. Concepts such as marital partnership, inheritance rights, and legal guardianship developed through centuries of ecclesiastical jurisprudence. Even today, legal systems in Europe and beyond retain echoes of medieval canon law. The medical theories of the time, although scientifically inaccurate, contributed to the development of European universities. The study of humors, natural philosophy, and herbal treatments formed the foundation of early medical education. While modern medicine rejected these theories, the structure of medical training, academic degrees, and clinical practice evolved from medieval institutions. Thus, the world of monastic infirmaries, university lectures, and manuscript libraries indirectly shaped modern healthcare. The most important consequence of all, however, lies in what these customs reveal about the human condition. Although medieval practices appear strange, they reflect universal concerns: fear of disease, desire for stability, need for companionship, and the struggle to understand emotions. Medieval people confronted these challenges with the tools available to them: religion, superstition, tradition, community, and creativity. Their customs, even the most unusual ones, were attempts to bring order to a difficult world. Today, their legacy encourages us to view the past not as primitive or irrational, but as a society shaped by different tools and different fears. The medieval world lacked scientific knowledge, but it possessed deep cultural intelligence. Communities created systems, legal, spiritual, and symbolic, that helped them survive. Their practices show how humans adapt to uncertainty and how societies develop rituals to make sense of life. The medieval era also teaches us to question the illusions of modern certainty. Many of the fears faced by medieval people still exist today, though we address them differently. Their customs remind us that every society creates its own ways of understanding relationships, morality, and human behavior. The strangeness of their methods does not diminish their insight. Instead, it reveals a world struggling, like ours, to balance hope, fear, love, and responsibility. As we close the story of medieval intimacy, we see a civilization defined by contradiction. Strict laws stood beside ancient rituals, religious devotion coexisted with superstition, public order depended on deeply personal matters. Yet from these contradictions emerged traditions, literature, legal structures, and cultural values that still shape the modern world. What survives today is not the literal practice of medieval customs, but the lessons they offer. They show that every society, no matter how distant in time, uses stories, rituals, and beliefs to navigate the complexity of human life. They remind us that the past is not merely a record of strange practices, but a mirror reflecting the timeless challenges of being human.